Hi there, I'm Whitney Smith, and we are going through the security guard training syllabus, and we're here on Section 2, the Private Security and Investigative Services Act and Ministry Code of Conduct. So, this is going to be a key section, really understanding the legislation that we work within, and of course, what's expected of you. So, going through this section overview, the Private Security and Investigative Services Act 2005 regulates the security industry. As such, security guards must be familiar with the Act to ensure that they follow the Act and its regulations, including the Code of Conduct and associated prohibitions. The trainer, so in our case, it would be one of our courses, the trainer introduces legislation to the student by outlining all relevant components and explaining the Code of Conduct. So this is going to be 2 hours worth of in-class. And then, of course, you're expected to do some outside class time, which is your pre-reading, journal assignments, things like that. So the minimum requirements here is really that the PSISA, which is what we call the Private Security and Investigative Services Act, which this is currently under review. So this video is being filmed in March 2026, and the PSISA is under review to be modernized/updated. So stay tuned, though this information is true and correct as of March 2026. Here on the Ontario website, we don't know when that modernization and update is going to take place, but as of today, this is the information. So the course is going to need to explain the PSISA, so explaining the individual's responsibility regarding licensing, including license process and mandatory requirements. One of the big issues that I would say, I've been in the industry 20 years, I would say one of the biggest things that we see is the licensing is now portable. So it used to be that if you worked for one of my companies, for instance, let's say you're a security guard and you worked for Smith Security, you could only work for that company. And then, that wasn't helping some people if they, let's say, got fired, laid off, quit, whatever the process was, and then needed to get hired with a new company. Sometimes it could take weeks, which obviously is expensive, right? If you're going from job to job, and it potentially would take weeks to get the licensing process for that new company. So the ministry went to what's called a portable licensing, which is what we have now. The problem with the portable licensing is it really gave people this idea is like, wow, I'm a licensed investigator, or I'm a licensed security guard. Now I'm going to sell services as if I'm a company. So that caused a lot of issues. And I would say that's still something that a lot of people are not properly familiar with now, even with the course, to be honest. People still make that mistake and they'll start to sell services online to friends and family or, whatever. And you can't do that. So the PSISA is really going to go through that licensing, the licensing process, and the mandatory requirements. The licensing process itself basically is 3 steps. So step 1 is taking a training with a provider you feel comfortable with. Let it be us if you want to, or we're happy to train you. All of our courses are instructor-led. Of course, I'm biased, but I'm going to say it's the best on the market. So you're going to do you're going to do your course with whichever provider you pick. You're going to write your exam, and then you're going to apply for the license. So realistically, a pretty straightforward and easy process, but this is really going to explain that. And then it's going to describe the general duties, standards, practices, regulations, and prohibitions. This is definitely important to note, especially if you've potentially lived in another province, let's say a state in the United States or another country. The things that you might have done in another country, state, or province are going to potentially be different than what you're doing here. So you need to understand the Ontario laws and the PSISA, which is what you're going to be licensed and governed under. So you need to make sure that you understand and know all the rules, the regulations, and prohibitions, of course, for that. And the explaining the requirement to produce a license. So that's essentially if you're on a site and someone says, "I want to see your security guard license." Mind you, you have like a little name tag basically that'll say mine could say Smith, and then it could say 1205 as the license number. So that's one way that people know who you are in an identification, but they can ask to see your security guard license. So it used to be that you had a physical card similar to a driver's license, and we've requested that in the modernization of the PSISA that they bring it back because they actually removed it several years ago and it went to a digital license. So it's just this PDF, which honestly people are scamming that very much so. You're ultimately having people just using Canva and Adobe, and they're kind of creating their own licenses and, switching out pictures and license types, all of that. So Some people might say, hey, I want to see your security guard license. I want to make sure that you're actually a licensed security guard. So you need to produce it, which right now, because it's not a physical card, it's on your phone. The challenge with that is you have to show it to somebody. So you're not expected to be like, here's my phone, go ahead and take it and, look at it. No. Keep your phone in your hand and then hold it and then say, here you go, making sure that you hold and carry the possession of that, because some people will grab it and run away. So you don't want to find yourself into any issues. So we're going to kind of go through these different things. Then, of course, we have the code of conduct. So we're going to explain the relevant components and consequences of failing to comply. And then we're going to define compliant procedures. This is very important. You need to understand, when you work in a professional industry, the rules, the laws, and the guidelines. You need to understand what you can and cannot do. And not only do you want to represent the industry well, you also want to represent your employer well and the client that you're conducting security services for. So you need to know everything to do with the industry. It's your responsibility as a licensed professional, right? If you didn't need to know it, then there would be no license, and it would just be, you'd be like a handyman who just has no real qualifications behind him, but he's the handyman, So you don't want to be that guy. Then, of course, we're going to go through the outline. This section introduces you to your responsibilities as a security guard under the PSISA. You're going to be provided instruction on all relevant requirements of the Act and the Code of Conduct and the consequences for noncompliance and public complaint procedures. So right now, I actually will say the ministry is very lackadaisy when it comes to the noncompliance, which is one of the things that, as a training provider and a dual licensed agency, that we are asking for is higher fines, higher repercussions, whatever it might be, for individuals who violate the PSISA and the Code of Conduct, because it really represents the industry negatively. So though it's somewhat, lax right now, we really are hoping that gets heavily changed, because it needs to be. We need professionalism and honesty and integrity in this industry, hands down. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So you're going to have your pre-reading of the relevant sections of the PSISA and Code of Conduct. You can find that, here on the Ontario website. It'll kind of link to the PSISA and the Code of Conduct, so you can read it. You're going to have lectures on the elements in the Act of the Code, and the group discussion for clarification on inappropriate behaviors. And then, of course, your learning journal time, where you're going to have, the notes that you're taking throughout. And again, make sure you're taking those notes and practicing with your learning journal as much as possible by writing down everything that, you think is relevant and important, especially as you go through certain sections where, you're learning some of the practical side of it, or some descriptions or stories that are relevant, or things that you're going to be thought-provoked on. Write those down. Make sure you're really engaging with that material. And then, of course, you're going to have the quiz at the end of that section, just going over that section and everything to do with the PSISA and Code of Conduct. So that's section 2 through the Security Guard training syllabus. Thanks for watching.